"You are safe," said the lone rancher when he saw an Apache woman crying in the rain. The rain fell heavily over the wide, open plains, turning the dirt paths into soft mud. The sky was dark and heavy, clouds rolling and rumbling with distant thunder. A lone rancher named Daniel walked slowly, his worn boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. The rain soaked through his coat and hat, but he hardly noticed. His mind was full of his day's work, checking the fences, making sure the cattle were safe, and fixing what the storm had already damaged. Life on the ranch was hard and lonely, but Daniel had long grown used to it. As he walked along a familiar path near the edge of the woods, something unusual caught his eye. At first, it was only a movement in the rain, a dark shape that seemed to tremble as if the storm itself frightened it. Daniel paused, squinting against the rain, trying to see clearly. Then he realized it was a woman standing alone in the open, her face hidden beneath wet hair. Her shoulders shook, and he could see the glint of tears on her cheeks. The sight made his heart tighten. Daniel had lived alone for many years, and encounters like this were rare. Even in the wild and untamed lands of the Southwest, he had learned to be cautious. But something about her made him step closer. She didn't appear threatening. She looked small, fragile even, and lost. He called out softly, "Hey, are you all right?" The woman didn't answer. She simply shook her head and turned slightly away as if she wanted to disappear into the rain. Daniel could see the mud soaking the lower hem of her dress, and her bare hands trembled. Without thinking too much, he removed his coat and held it out to her. "Here," he said gently, "you are safe, come under this." For a moment she hesitated. Daniel waited, his heart pounding. In his experience, people in trouble often ran when help came. But after a long pause, she took a small step forward, her eyes still wary, and let him drape the coat over her shoulders. The weight of it was heavy but warm, and it gave her something to hold on to. They began to walk toward the ranch together. The rain fell harder now, drumming on the coat and hats and soaking through their boots. Daniel didn't speak much. He simply led her along the path, careful not to rush or frighten her. Occasionally, he glanced at her face. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with sharp, delicate features softened by her fear and sadness. Her dark hair clung to her face in wet strands, and her eyes, though tearful, held a quiet strength that seemed unusual for someone in such distress. Finally, they reached the small wooden cabin that Daniel called home. The cabin was modest, built from rough timber and stones he had gathered himself. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the soft glow of a lantern shone through the small windows. Daniel pushed open the door and led the woman inside. The warmth of the fire met them immediately, a sharp contrast to the cold, wet world outside. "Sit down," Daniel said softly, pointing to a chair near the fire. She obeyed, still shivering slightly. Daniel set down a kettle on the stove and began to light it. The sound of water bubbling seemed louder in the quiet cabin. After a moment, he handed her a cup. "Drink this," he said. "It's warm. It will help." The woman took the cup with hesitant hands, blowing gently on the surface before sipping. The warmth traveled slowly through her, easing some of the chill and tension in her body. She finally looked at Daniel, and he could see the fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again. It was clear she wasn't ready to talk yet. Daniel respected that. He knew what it was like to carry pain in silence. For many years, he had lived alone on this ranch, learning to face the harshness of life without anyone to share it with. He understood that trust took time, especially when someone had been hurt. While the woman sat quietly, Daniel moved around the cabin, preparing a simple meal. He didn't ask her questions yet. He didn't push. Instead, he worked with calm, steady motions, letting her presence settle. The smell of frying vegetables and bread filled the small cabin, mixing with the scent of wet wood and rain. Slowly, the woman's shoulders began to relax, and she seemed to sink a little deeper into the chair. After a while, the rain outside began to lessen, turning from a heavy downpour to a steady drizzle. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft and trembling. I didn't know where to go," she said. Her words were barely audible, but Daniel leaned in, listening. I ran from people. I didn't know where to hide." Daniel nodded, understanding without needing the details. "You're safe here," he said again. "No one will hurt you." His words were simple, but he hoped they carried meaning. He poured her another cup of tea and sat down across from her. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "Nahel." Her voice was quiet, but there was something strong in it, something resilient that matched the quiet strength in her eyes. Daniel smiled faintly. "Nahel," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the rain dripping from the roof and the wind rustling the trees outside. The cabin felt safe and warm, a small refuge from the storm both outside and within. Slowly, Nahel began to tell small pieces of her story, enough to show that she had faced danger and fear, but not so much that it overwhelmed her. She spoke of her village, her family, and the people she had lost. She spoke with pauses, stopping often, but Daniel listened patiently, never interrupting. He shared small pieces of his life as well, about the ranch, the cattle, and the quiet loneliness of living alone. He didn't try to compare their hardships. Instead, he simply offered understanding. For the first time in days, Nahel felt a sense of calm. She realized that this man, this stranger, did not see her as a threat or a burden. He saw her as a human being, worthy of care and protection. Hours passed, and the rain outside finally began to fade completely, leaving a soft mist in the air. The sky lightened slightly, and the first hints of evening stars peeked through the clouds. Daniel stoked the fire and prepared a simple bed in a corner of the cabin, offering it to Nahel. She accepted, exhausted from fear, sadness, and the long walk in the rain. As she lay down, Daniel simply sat near the fire, keeping watch. He didn't speak. He simply let her rest, knowing that safety was sometimes quiet and patient, not loud or forceful. That night, for the first time in many days, Nahel slept without fear. She dreamed not of running or hiding, but of warmth, safety, and the strange comfort of trust. Daniel, too, found a measure of peace, watching over her from the corner, reflecting on how even in a harsh and lonely world, human kindness could create moments of hope and connection. The rain had stopped, but its memory lingered in the fresh, clean scent of the earth. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of a new beginning. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and two lives, strangers until that stormy evening, began to intertwine quietly, forming the fragile beginnings of trust, understanding, and perhaps friendship. The night was long, but it was safe. And for Daniel and Nahel, safety was the first step toward something neither of them fully understood yet, but both silently hoped for. Morning came slowly to the small cabin. Light filtered through the thin curtains, soft and pale, as the sun began its slow climb into the sky. The air was fresh after the night's rain, filled with the scent of wet earth and pine. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Nahel had slept most of the night, though she awoke briefly once or twice, hearing the wind whisper through the trees. Each time, she reminded herself that she was safe here, in the presence of Daniel, the rancher who had found her in the rain. Daniel was already awake, sitting near the fire with a small cup of coffee in his hands. He watched the fire dance and thought about the strange turn his life had taken. His days had always been routine: work with the cattle, mend fences, repair the cabin, check on the land. But something about the storm and the woman he had found had unsettled him in a way he couldn't fully explain. He didn't ask why she had come to him. He didn't need to. For now, she was safe, and that was enough. When Nahel finally stirred, she moved slowly, careful not to make noise. She had learned through her brief but difficult journey that caution could save lives. She washed her face with cool water from the basin, the cold water bringing her back to reality. As she looked into the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Her hair was damp and tangled, her eyes puffy from crying, but there was a quiet determination there, a spark of strength that had kept her moving forward through fear and loss. Daniel noticed her stirring and offered her a small smile. "Good morning," he said softly. "Sleep well," Nahel nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did, thank you for everything yesterday." Daniel shrugged lightly. "It was nothing. Everyone deserves a safe place when the storm comes." He gestured toward the fire. "Sit down, I'll make some breakfast." The two of them moved around the cabin in companionable silence. Daniel prepared a simple meal of eggs, bread, and fresh milk. The sounds of sizzling and the warm smells of food filled the room, adding comfort to the small space. Nahel watched him, hesitant to speak at first, but the quiet routine seemed to ease her tension. Finally, she found the courage to speak. "I should explain a little why I ran." Daniel nodded, inviting her to continue without pushing. "Take your time," he said. "If you want to tell me, I'll listen. If not, that's fine too." Nahel took a deep breath. "I come from a village far from here. My family, my people, we have faced many hardships. Recently, there were troubles with others who did not understand or respect our way of life. I had to leave. I had no choice." Her voice shook slightly, but she held herself upright as if determined to remain strong. Daniel listened carefully, letting her words sink in. He knew that the land they lived on was full of conflicts, misunderstandings, and fear between different people. He didn't need to know every detail to understand that Nahel had faced danger and needed protection. "I understand," he said finally. "It must have been harder than you can imagine." Nahel nodded, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of relief, not just from being safe from physical harm, but from being understood. Many people she had met before would have judged her, or turned away, or even laughed at her fear. But Daniel simply listened. That simple act made her feel a little less alone in the world. After breakfast, Daniel suggested they walk outside. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the ground soft and fragrant. Small puddles reflected the sky, and the green of the land seemed to sparkle with renewed life. Nahel hesitated, worried about the outside world and the dangers it might hold, but Daniel's calm presence reassured her. Slowly, she followed him out into the open air. As they walked, Daniel began to tell stories about the ranch, about the cattle, the seasons, and the land. He spoke of long days spent repairing fences, of winters where snow made the world almost impossible to cross, and of summers where the heat was so strong it felt like it would melt the ground. Nahel listened intently, fascinated by his knowledge and the quiet dedication he had to his life. In return, she shared stories of her village. She spoke of the mountains and rivers near her home, of the traditions her people followed, and of the festivals where her community would gather to celebrate life, even in hard times. Her words painted vivid pictures, and Daniel could imagine the bright colors of her world, the music and laughter that must have filled the air. As they walked, Daniel noticed something in Nahel's demeanor. Though she had been afraid, there was also a quiet bravery in her. She observed the land carefully, noticing small details, the path of a stream, the tracks of an animal, the way the wind moved through the trees. It was clear she had grown up learning to survive and adapt. Her fear was real, but it was tempered by intelligence and resilience. The walk lasted for nearly an hour. They returned to the cabin tired but refreshed, the fresh air and movement helping to lift some of the weight from their shoulders. Nahel began to feel a small sense of hope, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She realized that perhaps she could survive this new chapter in her life, and that there might be people in the world willing to help her without expecting anything in return. After returning, they settled back inside. Daniel suggested small tasks around the cabin to occupy their time and focus on practical needs. Nahel agreed, helping him sweep the floor, gather wood, and repair minor damages from the previous day's storm. Each task, though simple, gave her a sense of purpose and control. She had spent so long running, feeling helpless, and now she was able to contribute, to take small steps toward rebuilding a sense of normalcy. As the afternoon passed, Daniel began to ask gentle questions about her family, without pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. Nahel hesitated at first, then spoke quietly about her parents, siblings, and the community she had left behind. Her voice was soft, but there was love and respect woven into her words. Daniel listened, nodding, offering simple remarks of understanding. It was not sympathy that he offered, but acknowledgement, an important difference. In those hours, something important happened. Trust began to grow between them. Nahel realized she could speak and not be judged. Daniel realized he could care for someone in need without fear or hesitation. It was a small but significant connection, the kind that slowly heals old wounds and builds new strength. As evening approached, the sky turning a deep orange and purple, Daniel suggested they prepare a simple dinner. They worked together, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, sharing small jokes and laughter. For a brief time, the past hardships, fears, and sorrows seemed distant. The cabin felt alive, filled with warmth, food, and the quiet companionship of two people beginning to trust each other. After dinner, they sat near the fire. The wind whispered outside and the last light of the day faded. Daniel could see that Nahel was growing more comfortable, her body less tense, her eyes less guarded. "You've had a long journey," he said quietly. "I don't know exactly what you've faced, but I can see the strength in you. You've made it this far." "That's something to be proud of." Nahel looked at him, and for the first time in days she smiled, a small, hesitant smile but genuine. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't think I could make it." Daniel shook his head gently. "You did, and you will continue to make it. One step at a time. You're stronger than you know." Night fell, and the fire crackled softly in the quiet cabin. Outside, the world was peaceful, the storm forgotten but its memory lingering in the clean scent of earth and grass. Nahel lay down again, this time feeling safer than she had in weeks. Daniel kept watch, a silent guardian, ensuring that nothing disturbed the fragile peace they had built together. For the first time since she had begun her journey, Nahel allowed herself to hope, not blindly but with a quiet, cautious confidence. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, dangers, and decisions to make. But she also knew that she had found someone she could trust, someone who would not abandon her in the face of fear or uncertainty. Daniel, too, felt a sense of change within himself. His life had been lonely and repetitive, but the arrival of Nahel had brought new meaning to his days. He realized that helping someone in need was not a burden, but a gift, a chance to connect with another human being in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And so, as night fully settled over the plains, the cabin remained a small island of warmth and trust. Outside, the land slept quietly under the stars. Inside, two lives, once separate and marked by struggle, began to intertwine gently, forming the beginnings of a bond built on understanding, respect, and shared courage. The story of their first day together after the storm ended with quiet reflection, the kind that seeps deep into the soul. They had survived the rain, faced fear, and found safety in each other's presence. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, both felt, for the first time in a long while, that perhaps hope was not so far away. The days after the storm brought a quiet routine to the small cabin. The sun shone warmly on the plains, drying the mud and filling the air with the scent of grass and wildflowers. Daniel and Nahel had settled into a rhythm. Each morning they tended to the small tasks of the ranch, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, and mending broken tools. In the afternoons, they would walk the land together, inspecting the fields, gathering firewood, and watching the sky as clouds drifted lazily above. Nahel had begun to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in weeks. She had been running for so long, always looking over her shoulder, that the idea of staying in one place and feeling safe was almost unfamiliar. Yet Daniel's calm presence, his steady voice, and the simple acts of kindness he showed her gave her a growing sense of trust. She had realized that safety was not just about avoiding danger. It was about finding someone who respected and cared for her, someone who would not judge her for the past she carried quietly in her heart. Daniel, for his part, had noticed the change in her. At first she had been cautious, careful not to speak too much or make eye contact. But now she smiled more, asked questions about the land, and even shared stories from her past. She had a quiet wisdom, a knowledge of the world that came from experience, and Daniel found himself listening to her insights with admiration. Her presence had brought a new sense of purpose to his days, a reminder that life was not only about survival but also about connection. One morning, as they walked along a narrow trail leading to a small creek, Daniel stopped and pointed to a fallen branch. "We'll need to clear this," he said. "The cattle might wander if the path is blocked." Nahel nodded and bent down to help him move the branch. Her hands were strong, capable, and steady. As they worked together, the silence between them was comfortable, filled only with the sounds of the creek and the rustle of the wind in the trees. Daniel realized that these small moments, working side by side, sharing the effort, were as important as any conversation. Trust, he understood, could be built through action as much as through words. After clearing the path, they continued toward the creek. Daniel paused at the water's edge, watching the current swirl around the rocks. "This creek has been here longer than any of us," he said softly. "It has seen many storms, many travelers, and it keeps flowing, no matter what. I think we can learn something from it." Nahel listened quietly, her eyes following the water. She had seen many rivers and streams in her life, but Daniel's words gave her a new perspective. The creek, like life, could be gentle and steady, but it could also be strong enough to overcome obstacles. She thought about her own journey, the fear, the running, the uncertainty, and felt a small surge of courage. Perhaps she could, like the creek, continue forward despite the challenges that lay ahead. As they returned to the cabin, Daniel suggested they work on some repairs to the roof. The storm from days before had loosened several shingles, and it was important to fix them before the next rain. Nahel agreed, eager to contribute. Together they climbed carefully, passing tools and holding shingles in place. The work required concentration and cooperation, and through it, their bond grew stronger. Daniel admired her determination and quick understanding, while Nahel appreciated his patience and guidance. Once the repairs were done, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The quiet beauty of the moment made Nahel reflect on her past. She had been through fear and uncertainty, but now here, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Daniel noticed her thoughtful expression and offered a gentle smile. "You've changed in just a few days," he said. "I can see it in the way you move, the way you look around. You're learning to trust again." Nahel looked at him, her eyes meeting his. I never thought I would feel this safe again," she admitted. "I have been running for so long, and I forgot what it felt like to rest." Daniel nodded. "It's not easy to stop running, but sometimes the hardest part is realizing that you don't have to do it alone." That evening, as they prepared a simple dinner, they heard the faint sound of hooves in the distance. Daniel's ears pricked up. He knew the plains well, and he could sense when strangers approached. Nahel noticed his alertness and felt a flicker of unease. "Who is it?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "I'm not sure yet. Could be travelers, could be neighbors. We'll see." He finished preparing the meal and then stepped outside, keeping a careful eye on the approaching figures. Soon, a small group of men appeared, riding slowly toward the cabin. Their expressions were hard to read, and Daniel's instincts told him to be cautious. He returned inside, closing the door gently behind him. "They're not too close yet," he whispered to Nahel. "Stay calm. I'll handle it." Nahel's heart raced, but she trusted Daniel. She knew that he would protect her if there was any danger. She helped by quietly moving the chairs and small items to create space, preparing the cabin in case the men came closer. The tension was thick, but Daniel's calm presence kept her from panicking. The men stopped at the edge of the property. Daniel stepped outside, raising a hand in greeting. "Good evening," he called. "Can I help you?" One of the men, an older settler, spoke. "Evening. We were just passing through and saw smoke from your cabin. Didn't mean any trouble." Daniel nodded, studying their faces carefully. "You're welcome to pass, but please respect the land and the space here. It's private property." The men nodded and rode on, their hooves stirring the dust as they disappeared down the path. Daniel returned inside, closing the door and letting out a quiet sigh. Nahel looked at him with wide eyes. You handled that so calmly," she said. I thought we might be in danger." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's not about fighting or hiding. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to let things pass." "We didn't need trouble tonight." Nahel nodded, understanding more about his quiet wisdom. She realized that courage wasn't just about facing physical danger. It was also about patience, observation, and knowing how to protect oneself and others without unnecessary conflict. Over the next few days, life returned to its gentle rhythm. Daniel and Nahel continued to work together, share meals, and walk the land. Each day, Nahel's confidence grew. She learned the routines of the ranch, how to handle the cattle safely, and how to care for the small cabin. She even began to teach Daniel a few things about her people's knowledge of the land, how to recognize signs of animals, how to find edible plants, and how to move quietly and carefully through the terrain. Through this shared learning, their bond deepened. They were no longer just rancher and stranger. They had become partners in survival, in trust, and in understanding. They laughed at small mistakes, celebrated little victories, and found comfort in each other's company. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Daniel asked gently, "Nahel, do you think you might want to stay here for a while? Not just for safety, but because this could be home." Nahel thought for a moment, looking at the flickering flames. I think I would like that," she said softly. "I've never had a place where I felt I could truly rest. Maybe this could be it." Daniel nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "Then we'll make it a home, together." And so, the cabin became more than just a shelter from the storm. It became a place of learning, trust, and hope. Both Daniel and Nahel realized that safety was not just the absence of danger. It was the presence of care, understanding, and companionship. The days passed, filled with small victories and quiet discoveries. They began to plan for the future together, thinking about improvements to the ranch, ways to make life easier, and ways to live in harmony with the land. Nahel felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known since leaving her village, and Daniel felt a renewed sense of life he hadn't felt in years. Through the shared work, conversations, and quiet moments of reflection, they both learned an important truth. Strength and courage were not only about facing storms, but about allowing oneself to trust, to care, and to be cared for. The bond they were building was becoming the foundation for a new chapter, one in which fear did not rule their lives, and hope had room to grow. The sun set once more over the plains, casting long shadows and painting the sky in warm hues. Inside the cabin, Daniel and Nahel sat near the fire, side by side, quietly reflecting on their journey so far. They knew that challenges would come, that the world outside could be harsh and unpredictable, but they also knew that together, they could face whatever came their way. And as the fire crackled softly, the wind whispered through the trees, and the night settled over the land, they felt something rare and precious, A sense of belonging, of trust, and of hope for the days to come. The days on the ranch continued peacefully, but Daniel knew that the world beyond the cabin was not always kind. Life in the plains was often unpredictable, and the presence of strangers in the area reminded him that danger could appear without warning. He had lived long enough to understand that safety was fragile, and trust, even when earned, needed constant care. One morning, as the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting golden light across the fields, Daniel noticed movement near the edge of the woods. Through the mist, he saw 3 men approaching on horseback. Their expressions were stern, and their pace suggested purpose rather than casual travel. Daniel's heart tightened, but he did not panic. He had learned over the years to assess situations calmly before acting. He motioned for Nahel to stay inside the cabin. "Stay calm," he whispered. "I'll handle them." Nahel's eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting him as always. She felt a mixture of fear and admiration, fear because of the unknown intentions of the men, admiration because Daniel's calmness made her feel secure. The 3 men rode closer, their hooves thudding against the soft earth. One of them, the apparent leader, called out, "Evening. We're looking for someone, an Apache woman who was seen near the creek. She's said to have caused trouble in the area." Daniel stood his ground, keeping his voice steady. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "There's no trouble here. This is private property, and I ask that you respect it." The leader narrowed his eyes. "We've been told she might be hiding here. If you know anything, it's best to tell us." Daniel knew he could not allow them to take Nahel. He also knew that confrontation could lead to danger for both of them. He took a deep breath, thinking carefully. "I don't know anyone causing trouble. But if anyone is here, I can promise they're safe. You may look around, but I will not allow harm." The men hesitated, studying Daniel. They could see determination in his eyes and perhaps the hint of trouble if they pressed him. After a tense moment, they rode slowly around the cabin, keeping their eyes open. Daniel stayed outside with them, speaking calmly, answering questions without revealing anything more than necessary. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Nahel watched silently, her heart pounding. She felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Fear because the men were strong and serious, pride because Daniel was standing between her and harm, handling the situation with courage she admired deeply. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the men rode away, muttering among themselves. Daniel let out a quiet sigh of relief. "They've gone," he said, returning to the cabin. "You're safe." Nahel exhaled, tears of relief forming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Daniel shook his head. "We look out for each other, that's all." The encounter left both of them thoughtful. They realized that while the cabin provided physical safety, the world beyond was still unpredictable. They decided to take extra precautions, locking doors, checking fences, and keeping watch during the night. The incident also strengthened their bond, deepening their trust and understanding. They knew they could rely on each other when danger appeared. As the week went on, life returned to a quieter rhythm, but the experience left a mark. Nahel grew more confident, learning not only about the routines of the ranch, but also about facing fear with calmness and intelligence. She practiced moving quietly, observing the land, and understanding the signs of approaching danger. Daniel guided her patiently, impressed by her quick learning and resilience. One afternoon, they worked together in the fields, repairing a fence that had been weakened by the storm. Daniel handed Nahel a hammer and nails, explaining how to secure the posts firmly. "You're getting better at this," he said. "Your hands are steady and your eyes notice details most people would miss." Nahel smiled faintly. "I've had to be careful all my life," she said. "It helps to notice small things, patterns, sounds, movements. It can make a difference between safety and danger." Daniel nodded. "That's wisdom, and it's why I'm glad you're here. We can watch out for each other." The sun was high and warm as they finished the repairs. They paused to rest, sitting on the fence and drinking water. The land stretched out before them, endless and golden, the soft wind carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. For a moment, the world felt simple and peaceful, a rare gift after days of tension and uncertainty. As they rested, Nahel began to share more of her past. She spoke of her family, her village, and the customs she had grown up with. Daniel listened carefully, learning about traditions and ways of life that were different from his own. He admired her storytelling, the way she spoke of her home with love and respect, even after the hardships she had faced. In turn, Daniel shared stories from his own childhood, his life on the ranch, and the challenges he had faced. They laughed at small moments, Daniel's clumsy attempts at cooking certain meals, Nahel's surprise at the size of the cattle, and the endless chores that never seemed to end. Through these shared stories, they found connection, understanding, and a sense of family in their small, isolated world. However, peace was not permanent. One evening, as the sky darkened with heavy clouds, Daniel noticed tracks near the edge of the property. He recognized the marks immediately, another group of strangers likely searching for the same woman. He felt a surge of protectiveness and urgency. "Nahel," he said quietly, "we may have visitors again. We need to be careful." Nahel nodded, her heart racing, but she did not panic. She had learned from the previous encounter, and she knew that fear alone would not help. Together, they prepared the cabin. Daniel reinforced the doors, moved furniture to create barriers, and gathered tools that could be used for defense if necessary. Nahel helped, moving quickly and efficiently, demonstrating the strength and intelligence that had carried her through so many challenges. When the strangers arrived, Daniel greeted them calmly just as before. "Good evening," he said. "What brings you here?" The leader, a tall man with a stern face, replied, "We're looking for an Apache woman. She's said to have caused trouble in the area." "We were told she might be hiding here." Daniel remained steady. "I do not know of anyone causing trouble. This is private property. No one here will be harmed, but I will not allow violence." The men hesitated, and Daniel saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes. They could sense his resolve, and perhaps they realized that pressing the issue could lead to trouble they did not want. After a tense pause, they rode slowly around the cabin, observing but not interfering, before finally riding away into the night. Once again, Daniel returned inside, closing the door behind him. Nahel let out a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Daniel took her hand gently. "It's all right. They've gone. You're safe now." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I feel safer with you than anywhere else," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. "And I feel the same with you. We look out for each other. That's what matters." The experience strengthened their bond even more. They realized that courage was not just about facing physical danger. It was also about patience, intelligence, and supporting each other through fear. They learned that trust was earned not just through words, but through actions, careful thought, and shared responsibility. In the following days, they continued their routines, but they also practiced preparing for potential dangers. They learned to read signs in the environment, recognize approaching travelers from a distance, and communicate silently with gestures. Nahel's confidence grew, and Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose in teaching and protecting someone he had come to care for deeply. Even in the face of external threats, life on the ranch became richer. They celebrated small victories, laughed together over minor mistakes, and shared stories late into the evenings by the fire. Their connection deepened into something that was no longer just companionship. It was mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that could withstand challenges. Through it all, they both realized a fundamental truth. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely and compassionately despite it. Safety was not just walls or locks, but the presence of someone who could be trusted completely. And hope, fragile yet persistent, could grow even in the most uncertain circumstances. As the days passed, the sky cleared, the land dried, and the cabin felt warmer and more secure. Daniel and Nahel, through shared courage, intelligence, and trust, had turned a place of temporary refuge into a home. And though the world beyond the plains remained unpredictable, they knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, with strength, patience, and understanding. The days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch gradually settled into a comforting rhythm. The land, once battered by storms and uncertainty, seemed to breathe a quiet calm. Daniel and Nahel had grown closer, not just as companions, but as partners who relied on each other for strength, wisdom, and comfort. The bond they shared had deepened through challenges, shared work, and quiet conversations, forming the foundation of trust and mutual respect that would guide them through whatever lay ahead. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, casting a soft golden glow across the fields, Daniel and Nahel walked together to check the fences. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of grass and wildflowers, and the gentle sounds of birdsong accompanied them. For the first time since her long journey began, Nahel felt a sense of peace settle over her. She no longer moved through the world with constant fear or doubt. Here, with Daniel, she could rest, reflect, and even dream. As they worked side by side, repairing broken posts and reinforcing the fences, Daniel spoke quietly. "You've come a long way," he said. "I can see the change in you. You're stronger, wiser, and braver than when you first arrived." Nahel paused, looking up at him with a soft smile. "I've learned from you," she said, "from your patience, your calmness, and the way you face the world without fear. I've learned that strength is not just about running or hiding, but about standing firm and trusting others when it matters." Daniel nodded, feeling a warm sense of pride and admiration. "We've learned from each other," he said. "I've learned that courage can take many forms, and that hope is something we create together, not just something we wait for." After finishing their work, they returned to the cabin to rest and have a light meal. The sun was high and the warmth filled the small space, making it feel inviting and safe. Nahel sat near the fire, her thoughts drifting back to the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the running, the uncertainty. It all seemed so distant now, yet she could still remember the pain and the anxiety vividly. She realized how far she had come, and a quiet sense of gratitude filled her heart. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly. "I didn't think I could find safety, trust, or a place where I belonged, but now I feel like I finally have a home." Daniel smiled, reaching out to place a comforting hand over hers. "And you do," he said. "This is home and you are welcome here, always." The evening brought a gentle breeze and the soft glow of the setting sun. Daniel and Nahel sat on the porch, watching as the sky transformed into shades of orange, pink, and purple. The calmness of the moment was a stark contrast to the storms and dangers they had faced together. It was a reminder that, despite the challenges, peace and beauty could be found in the world if one had the courage and patience to seek it. As darkness settled over the plains, the first stars appeared, twinkling softly in the clear night sky. Daniel and Nahel remained on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sharing stories and dreams for the future. They spoke of the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, the ways they could care for the land, and the life they hoped to build together. Each word, each plan, strengthened the bond between them and gave them both a renewed sense of purpose. One night, after a long day of work and reflection, Daniel turned to Nahel with a serious expression. "Nahel," he said gently, "I want you to know that whatever comes next, you are never alone. We've faced fear, uncertainty, and danger together, and we've come through it. That's something to remember always." Nahel looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I know," she said softly, "and I feel stronger because of it, because of you." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet companionship speaking louder than words. The fire crackled softly, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of a new beginning. It was a peaceful moment, yet it was also a moment of reflection, a recognition of the journey they had endured and the lessons they had learned along the way. The days continued with gentle routines, shared laughter and small victories. Daniel and Nahel worked together to plant a small garden, gathering seeds and tending to the soil. They built small shelves in the cabin, painted simple decorations, and organized the space to make it feel more like a home. Each task, no matter how small, brought a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. They celebrated the little things, the first sprout in the garden, the repaired fence, the warm bread fresh from the oven. Through these shared activities, Nahel found a new sense of independence and confidence. She realized that she could not only survive, but also thrive in this new chapter of her life. The cabin, the land, and Daniel's quiet guidance had given her more than safety. They had given her hope and a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as they rested by the creek, Nahel spoke of the future. "I think I want to stay here for good," she said. "This place, it feels right. I've found peace here and I want to help make it stronger, better." Daniel looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "Then we will," he said. "Together we will make this our home, safe, strong, and full of hope." As the weeks passed, word of their peaceful life reached nearby settlements, but they faced no further threats. Daniel and Nahel's careful planning, patience, and wisdom had ensured that they remained safe. The experience had taught them both that courage was not always loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, steady, and compassionate. It was about protecting what mattered, building trust, and acting with intelligence and heart. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned to deep shades of blue, Nahel stood outside, looking at the land. The field stretched out before her, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. She could hear the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the quiet flow of the creek. Everything felt calm, balanced, and alive. She turned to Daniel, who stood beside her, and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For your trust, your patience, and your courage. I feel like I can finally move forward." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've earned every bit of it," he said. "You've been brave, strong, and wise. Together we've faced storms, both in the weather and in life, and we've come through. And we will continue to come through no matter what." The night settled over the plains, peaceful and still. The cabin glowed warmly against the darkness, a beacon of safety and hope. Inside, Daniel and Nahel prepared for rest, knowing that the future held challenges, but also promise and opportunity. They had built a life together, not just as protector and guest, but as partners, friends, and companions. Their shared experiences had created a bond stronger than fear, hardship, or uncertainty. In the quiet of the night, as they lay near the fire, both reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The rain, the storm, the fear, and the uncertainty had all been part of a path that led to understanding, trust, and hope. They realized that life could be difficult, unpredictable, and even frightening, but that courage, compassion, and connection could turn challenges into strength and fear into opportunity. The stars shone brightly overhead, each one a reminder of the vastness of the world and the possibilities it held. Daniel and Nahel, once strangers brought together by chance and circumstance, had found in each other a sense of safety, belonging, and hope that neither had expected but both deeply cherished. As the first light of dawn crept over the plains, signaling the start of a new day, they rose together, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The cabin, the land, and the quiet strength they had built together would guide them through the days ahead. And in that quiet morning, with the world waking gently around them, they understood a truth they would carry forever. Safety, trust, and hope are not simply given. They are created, nurtured, and shared with care and courage. And so, the story of Daniel and Nahel, which began with a storm, fear, and uncertainty, ended with light, peace, and a promise of new beginnings. The land stretched before them, endless and inviting, and for the first time both felt the quiet joy of knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together, with courage, trust, and hope in their hearts.